So it is now almost 6:45 p.m. and this has been refluxing, and I was able to achieve a stable temperature of 150 by setting this to about 220 on the hot plate. So I don't need the thermometer anymore. I'm going to take that away so I don't break it. And we're going to be doing an extraction with 5% aqueous sodium bicarbonates. So I'm going to go ahead and get my centrifuge tube ready. I want a screw cap centrifuge tube, and make sure that the cap itself has a little Teflon insert. It does. So that's what I'm going to do my extraction in. And then I'll actually be transferring that to another centrifuge tube to dry it over sodium sulfate. So I'll grab a second centrifuge tube. And we'll need a micro spatula for stirring. So we can measure a little bit of sodium sulfate into the centrifuge tube that we'll actually be storing this in. Actually use a bigger spatula for that. A little bit of a tip, that should be enough. If I have to add more, I'll add a little more later. And we're going to be using 3 1 milliliter washes of sodium bicarbonate. So I'll pour in about 4 milliliters of that, and I'll be using a pipette to transfer that. And we'll also need some pH paper because we want to make sure our last wash is basic. Grab out a piece of pH paper. Break that into 3 pieces. And a stirring rod for transferring the solution. So we're all set. It's 6:45. That's been refluxing for an hour. So we can disconnect the heating source and the stirrer. And just kind of pull that up out of there. And as usual, to cool the hot block, I'm just going to launch them into the sink. And allow the cold water to run on them. Put this away so I don't burn myself on it. As always, being careful to make sure the cord stays underneath. So let those cool. Don't need this anymore. Actually, I will keep that so I can set the vial in it. So that's my dry vial. This is the one I'm going to do the extraction in. And I need a pipette. For transferring this liquid, 1 milliliter at a time. Just set that tip down at 3 and keep expelling a little more until it fills up. So that's a milliliter in there. Ready to go. Purpose of the sodium bicarbonate obviously is to react with the excess acetic acid and sulfuric acid. And the ester itself will have a density lower than water. It'll float on top. So we're going to be transferring the contents of that vial to the centrifuge tube and doing 3 1 milliliter washes with sodium bicarbonate, and then making sure it's basic. If it's not, then we'll have to do a 4th wash. That's why I measured out 4 milliliters. We want to wait for that to cool. So at this point I can turn off the water. It's cool enough that it's not refluxing anymore. As long as I'm careful not to touch the hot vial, I can hopefully disconnect my hoses. Empty that out. We'll let that sit and cool. These can go back. Those are cool enough to touch. Stick those back as well. And I'm going to go grab my diffuser. I took it over to Hood 1 to do some dishes. For some reason Hood 1 doesn't have one. So I'm going to carefully disconnect that condenser. Just about, well, maybe not. Not quite cool enough to touch yet. Shouldn't need that basket anymore. Stir bar's dry. Still not cool enough to do anything with yet, but it's cool enough to detach. Smells fruity. Most esters smell fruity. There's no real need to wash this with soap and water. The ester is volatile and the rest of the things are water soluble. So we'll just kind of rinse it. Don't smell too much anymore and let that go. Smells a little bit like banana. Some of the 5-carbon alcohols, actually banana oil is isoamyl acetate, which is one of the 5-carbon alcohols, but more than one of the 5-carbon alcohols smells like banana, so you can't use that as evidence. So as not to spill, I'm actually going to use a pipette to transfer that as well. So we'll grab another pipette. it's too full for me to reach in with the stir bar remover to remove the stir bar, so pipetting it away will be an effective way of getting it out of there without spilling it. It doesn't take very long to pipette. Approximately 5 mils of volume. It is, after all, what the conical vial is designed for, to allow you to get down to the bottom. Get that last little bit out easily. So the catch with a sodium bicarbonate extraction is always that the sodium bicarbonate, as you add it to the acidic solution, is going to generate some CO2. We want to make sure it doesn't generate it so quickly as to foam over, so you kind of drop that in fairly slowly. Just to make sure it doesn't get overexcited. Put that in there and pull up the next milliliter. Down to about 2. Yeah, it's looking good. So I want to stir that a little bit with a micro spatula, the non-grooved end. You can see that CO2 is being generated pretty vigorously. And I don't want to cap it up until it's mostly done with that. I don't want too much pressure. Usually just twisting that between your fingers is the most effective way to stir with the micro spatula. Still some gas evolution. So I've grabbed 3 10 ml beakers here. These are going to be for my wash 1, 2, and 3. And then I'll be able to use my pH paper to measure the acidity or basicity of those. So that seems to be done, evolving gas pretty much. So now it's safe to put the cap on there and shake it a little bit. And vent. And shake. And vent. And now we'll let that settle. And I saved that pipette to take the bottom layer away. Got a little bit more in there. Just add that. Oops, wrong side. It's going to take a little while to settle. You can see maybe hold that in the right place. You can see that it's a little cloudy, maybe. Might be hard to see through the camera, but we got a line there, but then some cloudiness above. I'd like both layers to be clear before I separate. Those are clearing up nicely. Use this pipette. You always want to press on it to expel the air so you don't mix it. And then I will pull out that bottom layer. And a little bit of air mixed in there. Put that back in there. Accidentally squeezed it as I was going in. And there's a little tiny bit of the ester that came with it. So what I'll do is just drip that out until all the water's gone, and then return the ester. So now we'll add our second milliliter of bicarbonate. Dropwise again, because as you can see we're getting some bubbling. Pull up another milliliter for the third wash, and I'm just going to do that procedure again where I use my micro spatula to stir it so that most of the gas evolution is done. Before I put the cap on. And you can see the volume of the top layer is decreasing because the acetic acid is being converted to sodium acetate and going into the water. We only used 1.75 milliliters of unknown alcohol, so we don't expect a volume of much more than about 2 milliliters of the ester. Maybe even a little less. Safe to cap that up now. And we'll mix that again. A little pressure release. And we'll let that settle again.